Different World Pharmacy, Vol. 4 Chapter 7. Rotavirus Infection and Abandoned Child. The Empress's cane is thrown into the clear sky. Violent flame. T.L. Note. Flame violations is a poor substitute for an aggressive command from the wild Empress with less violations de la flamme. The moment the cast is made, the place T.L. Note. The plain near the imperial city of San Fluive has no one is foolish enough to invoke an inferno around forests, hillsides with wildlife, becomes a sea of fire. The whirlwind of a large flame scorches the wilderness on the outskirts of the imperial city, and burns down a vast area at glance. Some of those who witnessed the event feel suffocated by the large consumption of oxygen by the blaze. Since the blaze travels downwind, the caster is not wrapped in smoke. However, if humans are caught with that violent flame, not even bones or shadows would remain. This is terrible. The land of such a vast area turned into scorched soil in a short time. Solomon, who became the Empress's theological advisor, witnesses the sight of the lifeless land that was swifted away. The massive flame was violent enough to burn the clothes that he wore even when he casted a water art user's elemental ice barrier around him for protection. After the Empress casted a flame inferno, there will be no living plants left to be seen. There are small amounts of lingering divine power that ponded on the ground. The Empress is unquestionably the current strongest god among the gods in the world beside Falma, who is currently possessed by medicine god amongst human beings. I'm exhausted. The Empress, exposed directly to the hot air of the inferno, sweats slightly on her forehead, drinks water in satisfaction, unties her hair, and puts on her jacket back on. The new Empress's aide, Solomon, takes a sigh of admiration at the beautiful and impressive divine technique. Her power has not declined at all while in office. Who dares to turn against the Empire, or takes on the Empress alone as enemies? At the time when the war begins, the country will sink into a sea of fire. That terrifying divine technique for the Sea of Inferno has been further refined and magnified in power by the guidance of Solomon in detail. Of course, this test at the outskirts of the Empire is not a bloody battlefield. Thank you, Your Majesty, the Empire's Empress, for invoking the wildfire. This will produce good grass in the near future. Cattle will be happy if they have young shoots. The rancher is quite impressed to see the great divine technique up close. Keep cows away so they don't inhale the smoke. This is an annual event for the Empress to burn the grazing fields under the Empire's management once a year. The Empress's divine art training that can use ultra-wide flame divine art is limited to the desert, sea, and grazing field. This divine art is too powerful for her to use during peacetime. What is the range of ability of Your Majesty's current divine skill? Solomon asks. She observes the gauge on her cane, which has a meter that measures double rating of the common divine power meter. It seems to be at 70%. It was a good exercise. Solomon smiled wryly. She appears like an innocent girl. Solomon continues to ask. By the way, how much power does Falma have? He doesn't want to give up training for Falma. He's not a blunt person to declare his intention. In the case of Falma, if he uses even 1%, the Empire will be destroyed. Solomon sighs as he thinks it requires daily training in the divine art is necessary. Why do you want to understand the power of Falma? By comparing. One can gauge his power with the power of successive guardian deities in the scriptures. In the Empress's eyes, Solomon is quite clever to bring up the idea. If that is the case, I wonder if there is remaining power for other sacred nations. Falma stated that he would go back to the great shrine at the holy city, and the Empress has initiated her first move to notify the great shrine. She mentions to Solomon Falma's purpose. It seems that he desires to return the treasure wand of the great church. However, Falma is a dignitary of the Empire and my chief pharmacist, so I'm not going to send him to the holy city. If he needs to return it, send it with a messenger. If Falma disappears from the Empire without notice, T.L. Note. Kidnapped and harm is done to Falma, I will declare war on the holy city on the same day. Since there is no one who can detain Falma other than the Holy City, it can be regarded as the work of the Holy City without further evidence. If there is a need to meet with Falma, have them meet him in my presence. Since Falma has been targeted, the Holy City must gain consent from the Empire. A reply came back indicating that it is not necessary to return the Holy Treasure Wand while the Empress has Falma in her custody as her primary pharmacist. Falma is surprised when the Empress reports the letter to Falma. The Empress's authority shuts down the great church of the Holy City. Falma cannot lose Solomon and desires Solomon's safety. In this regard, the Empress wonders how the history book will be adjusted later. The great church cuts all communication with Falma. The Empress has a raid search for clues to the Holy Spring as Falma can no longer ask the great church for information. However, Falma mentions that the priests of the imperial capital's local church come often to the different world pharmacy to buy medicines. The current date is April of 1147. In the midst of Pal's leukemia chemotherapies, additional consultations by Falma to prevent a relapse and the result is favorable. Pal also visits Bruno's, his father place on good days. Little by little, he begins to take over as the chief pharmacist for Bruno's and Falma's patients. Bruno wants to immerse himself in running the Sanfleuve Imperial School of Pharmacology University, and Falma has to deal with the different world pharmacy along with other things. So Pal has been deemed as the best successor. Pal is quite skilled, his knowledge and communication are good, and his reputation is not worse than that of Bruno. In addition, he begins to accumulate favorable results by treating patients who could not be cured by Bruno's diagnosis and treatments by using new drugs from Falma. Pal often appears at Falma's pharmacy mainly to stock up on new medicine. I think the patient has this kind of illness but I want to use this medicine instead. And this is how it goes between Falma and Pal. Falma confirms the symptoms and various observable test results provided by Pal, and if Falma believes the diagnostic is correct, Falma hands over the medicine. Pal uses the camera to provide the photos, which are very helpful in explaining the conditions of the patient. If there is any doubt about the diagnosis, Falma directly goes to the patient after informing Pal. Pal is still 2 years behind Falma in becoming the first-class pharmacist, but he has begun to practice first-class pharmacist training with patients. Pal's life is quite fulfilling. Pal comes to Falma's pharmacy one afternoon and enters through the back door with an unusual action. He normally comes through the front door, but it seems that something is wrong. He whispers to the pharmacy's staff. Is Falma around? What's wrong with that child? Is that Pal's secret child? Ellen asks Pal as she stares at the infant who appears to be a few months old in Pal's arm. However, the baby did not cry energetically like a common child, and seems to be feeble. Furthermore, the infant's face and hair are full of grime. The child may be abandoned and dehydrated. When Pal examines by pricking the facial area of the infant, vomit is seen around the mouth. There is no tension on the skin, and the area around the eyes is depressed. As Pal lightly pinches the skin on the back of the baby's hand, the skin does not return to its original elasticity and remains in a chevron shape. This is one way to detect signs of dehydration. The infant's breath is light and low heartbeats. In the meanwhile, Falma prescribes all the prescriptions for the patients who are rushing to the pharmacy and hands the prescriptions to the part-time pharmacists. Al notes. Probably Roger, Rebecca, and Celeste that were mentioned back in Volume 3 aside from a lot. The curly purplish hair Celeste takes over at the counter. Falma tells the current part-time pharmacist, I'll prepare this medicine and give it to you. If you don't see me, please wait. Okay, shopkeeper. Celeste received the prescription in bulk and nodded heavily. I apologize for waiting for the medical candies. Please hand them out. Oh, thank you. Lot carefully distributes the medical candy, and the patients do not complain for the long wait. Lot mentions to Falma. At the moment, your brother went upstairs. Falma decides that the infant may be infected and guides Pal with the infant to an isolation room in one of the doctor's offices on the second floor. Falma, Pal, and Ellen follow into them and examine the infant. Falma discusses with Pal. It's surprising that Pal picked up this abandoned child. I can't leave this child alone. I may be a noble's child, but I am likely to become a commoner without notice. Pal lays the infant on the bed, wraps the infant in a blanket, and looks down at her pitifully. Yeah, the divine veins didn't open. The parents were unhappy with the child. Ellen sympathizes for the infant. When a child of an aristocrat cannot use the divine power, the child cannot become a nobleman if the divine vein connection does not open. Many aristocrats think that it is shameful for their families to have such a worthless child and are willing to throw the child away among their children. This infant happens to be one of the disappointing children, abandoned in front of the temple, provided protection by the great church, and will be taken to the orphanage. However, since the temple of the imperial capital is too populated, the children are placed at the eaves of a suitable houses in some cases. A noble child with an open divine vein can measure their divine power with a divine power meter. The gauge of the divine power meter does not work for children who don't have their divine vein open. Ellen brings over a divine power meter to measure the infant just in case, but there are both good and bad news. No, if we want to save this child, we can hire the child as a servant later. This is also a saving grace. I don't want to hand it over to the current temple. Ellen began to consider in taking her over to the Earl's house. I mean, this kid seems to have divine power. Contrary to their views, Falma murmured to everyone. Falma can see a faint sparkle in the back of her body, the infant. He acknowledged that is an untouched source of divine power. Well, let's begin the treatment now. Falma prepares clean water with his divine arts creation, cleanses her body and changes her clothes. He recently developed a baby's diaper and uses on the infant. Oh, that fits perfectly. The infant's diarrhea has subsided for the time being because of severe dehydration. It seems that there is almost no water left in the body. If this happens, it is likely to result in serious infections. The infant isn't crying or sweating. She is vomiting, has whitish diarrhea and a slight fever, so I think it's a rotavirus infection. Pal remarks based on the symptoms. Viral infection may cause excrement of bile color, brown, to disappear on stool. He is paying attention to it. Can you cure her? Pal asks Falma, and Falma suspects a probability that Pal is susceptible to infection due to a decrease in white blood cells during his chemotherapy. Pal brings back an infant, risks his life while knowing exactly his weakened physiological condition, and recognizes the potential for infection with this virus. If Pal is infected, it can be life-threatening. While not condoning Falma's patient behaviors, Falma didn't want to waste Pal's goodwill. Has it turned white? TL note. Pal knows Falma's diagnostic eye and its functionalities as Falma treated him since volume 3. Falma did not use the diagnostic eye at first, but now he is using it as he performs the follow-up diagnostic. Everyone wears protective vinyl capes, gloves and masks. Pal, who brought the baby, throws away everything he is wearing to prevent the spread of infection, and Falma lends him the lab coat meant for the part-time job staff. TL note. If you haven't noticed the talks between Elle and Pal during their magic match, you can sense the author is attempting to spark a relationship between them. Now, Pal's butt naked. What is going through that vixen's mind? White stool does not mean bile. I think it is biliary atresia. Ellen presents another possibility. There are various reasons for white stool, not necessarily because of virus infection. Falma smells the stool of the girl who was left in the scent. TL note. Yep. Smell it. Ancient Chinese practices quite often, literally daily. The practice is skill continued today. Ellen, smell it. Ellen rolls her hand over the stool to capture the smell of the stool, even though she is frowning. Falma considers the risk of infection by air vector towards Pal, tells him to refrain from joining in. It smells sour. When it smells fishy, there is the presence of bacteria in the diarrhea. When it smells sour, it is viral presence in the diarrhea. Then it's rota. Pal is quite knowledgeable as he presents the result of the scent. Falma nods and says, that's right, there is a high possibility of rotavirus. Falma uses his diagnostic eye again. Since viruses are so small that they cannot be seen under a microscope like bacteria to determine a definitive diagnosis, it appears to be the suspected rotavirus infection. The infant's whole body seems to be infected, but the light is concentrated along the digestive tract. The light seen through Falma's eyes is magenta, which is almost red. TL note. Red is bad as in it's incurable. The case is treatable, but it's quite dangerous. Never allow room for prejudice in any medical case. Rotavirus infection was also referred to as pediatric pseudo-cholera. Even in modern Japan, the virus infects most infants, but in rare occasions where they become life-threatening, the mortality rate is extremely low due to proper treatment with modern medical science. Falma reminisces and freezes in a daze about the sweet old days in Japan with a painful distant gaze. In developed countries on Earth, it is rare to die from this disease. However, around the undeveloped countries of Earth, 40% of severe diarrhea up to the age of 5 is caused by the rotavirus, and the number of mortalities reaches 500,000 per year. It's one of the top causes for infant mortality. Infections stemmed from this virus are the most severe, as the symptoms are vomiting and severe diarrhea, in which this little female infant is exhibiting. This is an acute encephalitis, and multiple organ failures can also occur. And there is no silver bullet for rotavirus.